I feel primed for the conversation after the previous panel, both the Glenn's talk and the conversation and the Q&A that happened. And I'm looking forward to exploring some of those same themes, but from a slightly different vantage. And I'll be presenting a different understanding of, the Indigenous paradigm and what's at stake there for us within that paradigm. And we only have about an hour. And so this session is necessarily going to be brief and broad because I want us to have like a sense of the analysis, and I want us to also do a little bit of a practice towards the end. So while really the word posthuman covers a variety of positions, I'll start with my ideas that go into the formation of the posthuman project. So that's going to be the first thing I do in this talk. Secondly, I'll discuss why I think building decolonial and indigenous epistemologies is key for us in the current moment. Next, I'll talk about technology. Again, a theme that came up in the previous panel. What is technology, right? And specifically technology that enacts either meaningful relations or relations that are not meaningful. Finally, I'll guide us into a short practice where we invite in mythic intelligences and we invite in ancestral intelligences and planetary intelligences and see what is it that they are saying to us in this moment. And I am going to be mostly reading this paper during the first part of the session, at least. And my invitation to you is to listen to this academic talk as a poem. What happens if you listen to critique and theory and argument as if it was moving differently in you? And for some of you, I think I have some students here, but for many of you, what you might not know is that I'm eternally interested in the links between poetry and epistemology, right? Before I begin, I also want to greet the ancestors of this land where we are. I want to greet my own ancestors and teachers, and I want to greet the ancestors and teachers who are here in the room with us, looking at us, right? Like from these big banners, like they're holding down the fort for us. And I want to invite you to call in any of your bright and well ancestors, healed and whole ancestors that you want to call to be a part of our wise learning community and listen together with us, participate with us. Okay. So what surrounds the posthuman is my first question. Cultural historian Joel Dynasteen situates the current posthuman discourse within an unmarked white tradition of technological utopianism that also functions as a form of social evasion. He considers the ways in which ideas of technological progress have structured Euro-American identity. In this technocultural matrix, says Dynasteen, can be found progress, religion, whiteness, modernity, masculinity, and the future. So he names these 6 pillars of the technocultural matrix, which sit in contrast with the other civilizational matrices, with the other cultural matrices that get characterized often as primitive, as backward, as unchanging, as passive, as fundamentalist, as colonizable. Modernity then becomes the domain of the West. This is a way of characterizing itself that gives the West its rationale for domination. Since the others refuse modernity, the reasoning goes, they're essentially excluded from the telos, the redemptive future. So I want you to really note these words: rationale, reasoning, and the assumption that rationality will lead us to a future that is more progressive. Now, we know that rationality was instrumentalized by the colonial impulse to subjugate certain peoples and to subjugate certain territories, right? We might also know that modernity is not exclusive to the West. There are other modernities around the world, and these other modernities might not be constituted by the ways in which Western modernity is predicated on the difference between our lives and the lives of others, our lives and the lives of the pre-modern, modern lives and pre-modern lives, right? So I want us to really consider these links between technology, rationality, modernity, progress, and colonization. This means, in essence, that the techno-futures that are on offer will end up offering us more of the same. The mechanisms of control, power, violence that Glenn also mentioned in the previous session. In their present guise, these techno-futures are continuing to dream out of and to dream forward a dualist metaphysics. And that's the problem here. They are seeking to solve the problems that are being presented by a dualist metaphysics. So let's look at the word epistemology for a second. Epistemology can be defined as the study of what provides us with the kinds of knowledge that are recognized as knowledge and used to determine what constitutes reality. So one way in which the colonial matrix of power maintains its control is the control over knowledge, control over senses, control over perception. The work of Maria Lugones, Emma Perez, and Walter Mignolo makes it clear that modern rationality seeks to affect the logic of coloniality. By positioning itself as a benchmark for civilization, it can control the colonized struggle against oppression on the one hand, and pathways to their liberation and to their flourishing on the other. Epistemic work is needed for two reasons. Both to be able to call into question the Euro-Western propensity to universalize its own perspective, and to change the terms of the conversation, where the dominant imagination engages with the imagination of the other only to the extent that it itself benefits, right? So this session title uses the word building, and there is reason for that. The word building points to the way in which in the decolonial imagination, knowledge and praxis go together. Right? Building decolonial epistemologies entails becoming aware of the politics of knowledge production who is getting to make the knowledge and where, right? And this is something we need to be tuning into both in the academy and elsewhere. It entails seeking to overcome the logic of colonization, the logic of domination, by exposing the limits and the contradictions of Western modernity. I'm referencing here the work of Maldonado Torres. Building decolonial epistemologies further entails epistemic shifts that transform the very conceptions of self, subjectivity, space, and time that are at the foundation of the colonial project, as well as epistemic shifts that specifically take into account ways of knowing and principles of knowledge that, as Walter Mignolo reminds us, legitimate living in harmony and reciprocity rather than living in competition and meritocracy. It entails working towards a future that is not cut off from the past, but is entwined with it, and that holds possibilities for the respect and flourishing of all life, the self-organizing whole. Within an Indigenous paradigm, knowledge is not individual in nature. Bruce Wilson tells us that knowledge is seen as belonging to the cosmos, of which we are a part, right? So the researcher, the knowledge maker, the myth maker, they come in right there, right? In relationship, building Indigenous epistemologies points to developing ideas through the formation of relationships. An idea cannot be taken out of the relational context within an Indigenous cosmology and still maintain its shape. Right? Similarly, technology in an Indigenous paradigm is a premise of making that arises out of the entanglement of body, mind, soul, and spirit with the earth, with all of contextuality. And I want to present this model of technology to allow us to see what we have and what we don't have here in our Western understanding of technology. Within a Western paradigm, technology is often connected to reductionist notions of, where things are broken down into elemental constituent parts. It's connected to scientific materialism. It's connected to rationality, right? Within an Indigenous paradigm, Greg Gahete, a native scholar, tells us elemental parts have different meanings and different relationships according to the context. So let's go into this a little bit more fully. And I'll start with an example. And the example comes from Latin America, where technology is being purposed and repurposed guided by an ancient philosophy, which is called tequio in Mexico. And the word tequio comes from the Nahuatl word tequit. And the philosophy, the principles that make up the philosophy are the principles of mutual support, collaboration, small scale cooperation, right? They have encouraged the development of digital technology and other technology that both meets the everyday needs of communities and it allows communities to assert material sovereignty. So the goal of technological development through tequio is not economic progress in perpetuity, unending economic progress, right? Like the goal is to live with dignity. And this is the Yasnaya Aguiar, who is a linguist, has some wonderful writings on this. Now let's go back to what was, right? Because often past is a space, the pre-modern is a space where we think that there was no technology. But actually, we have plenty of archaeological evidence now, right? That there were extensive irrigation systems, there was land transport technology, there was water navigation systems, there were vessels, and I'm just only looking at the Americas right now. I'm not even looking at the rest of the world, right? But these have been found in pre-contact Native America. These have been found in Mesoamerica, the Nahuatl, Maya, and Zapotec civilizations. These have been found in the Inca, amidst the Incas and the pre-Incas of Peru, right? So everywhere. Cajete also gives us an example of a village called Hohocan in what is now Arizona. And he talks about how the canal systems in that village show that each river drainage served several villages, right? So basically what was going on is that the villages and the village chiefs were in conversation with each other. They were cooperating with each other. They were planning with each other, right? Like, so this mobilization of the idea, the philosophy of Tekit, right? So that's one way in which we can understand technology from an indigenous perspective. Secondly, technology in this paradigm is always in conversation with the more than human world, right? Biologist Robin Wall Kimmerer tells us that in Native ways of knowing, the humans are the younger siblings of creation, right? She tells us that the understanding is that because humans have the least experience with how to live, and they have the most to learn from the other species, they go to the other species to get this knowledge, right? Like, so knowledge from plants is what she's mostly interested in. And Greg Cajete also talks about how many indigenous technologies evolved from or were informed by relationships with animals, right? So for this reason, he says these technologies were usually ecologically sound. They had minimal impact on the environment in which they were used. And certain undertakings required permission from councils of animals. And then there were instances of how indigenous people partnering with animals and working with animals in other ways, right? So that's the second ways in which there's something unique going on here in this conception of technology. Actually, I do also want to say that, the Cajete also says one more thing, which is key, that beyond the material expression of technology amongst the indigenous people, the knowledge base itself becomes one of maintaining a thoughtful and proper relationship in the environment in which it arises, right? So this idea of the accountability piece. So technology understood in this way maintains ecological integrity, and it involves a complex harmonizing of mind, body, spirit within a living cosmos. Now, thirdly, moving on to the third feature, in an indigenous paradigm, technology, innovation, and knowledge are often seen as gifts from the other world. And this is where I find myself veering most strongly away from, Dylan Francisco's framing of, the relationship between indigenous paradigms and technology, right? Because the idea is that the place of ontological reality is the other worlds, right? Modernity's ontological imperialism has not erased or diminished the ways in which these are understood as real, right? And the other worlds ask that when new knowledge comes, we maintain relations of meaningful reciprocity. So one example, within the Zutujul Maya tradition, Martin Frechtel tells us, and Martin Frechtel has been initiated into that tradition, he tells us that anytime something is created, anytime something is invented, that which allows something new to come into being needs to be paid or offered something ritually or in the form of offerings, right? And this enaction of reciprocity feeds that which gives us life. But in modernity, for Frechtel, technological invention is going on taking from the earth and taking from the earth and taking from the earth and giving nothing in return. So there's a quote in an interview that Frechtel's done with Derek Jensen. Western culture believes that all material is dead. And so there is no debt incurred when human ingenuity removes something from the other world. Consequently, we end up with so-called advanced technology, while the spirits who give us the ability to make those things are starving. The universe is in a state of starvation, he says, and emotional grief, because it has not been given what it needs in the form of ritual food and gifts. We think we're getting away with something by stealing from the other side, but it all leads to violence. So, in this worldview, not reciprocating with what brings life, what gives life, is kind of like stealing, right? And it is a lack of reciprocity that causes warfare, that causes grief, that causes depression. When human beings, in the name of, rationality and rationalism and human superiority and literalism, they don't honor the reciprocal obligations for the creation of technology that actually helps them perform quite extravagant feats. I'm going to bracket the notion of what those offerings could look like. I don't know if any of you are curious about that. Maybe some of you have answers to that. I'm going to, bracket that. I want to, meanwhile, and maybe we can come back to that a little later, but just look at the technology we already have here in this room. We have technology here in this room, right? I have technology here, they're being live streamed. All those things are happening, right? So yes, it's a part of our life. Okay. But for now, let's briefly look at artificial technologies, because I'm interested in those also. And we've talked about the environmental costs of the AI industry a little bit, right? Like in the previous session, someone brought it up. Someone who came up to the mic. Again, the abstractions and euphemisms like the cloud tend to trick us into looking past the extractivism that supports this industry. There's an extraction of natural resources, energy, labor, and data of the like that is unprecedented. As leading AI scholar Kate Crawford puts it, this is an extractive industry that reaches into the furthest corners of the biosphere and the deepest layers of human cognitive and affective being. AI, she says elsewhere, is the opposite of artificial. It comes from the most material parts of the earth and from human bodies laboring and from all of the artifacts that we produce and say and photograph every day. So AI technologies are, if you look at the definition of colonialism, essentially enacting colonialism. right? They are moving from a place of entitlement to land, moving from a place of entitlement to resources, to cheap labor or free labor or to knowledge. And Max Lieu, a native scholar, tells us colonialism is about genocide. It's about access. It's about entitlement, right? Crawford also convincingly makes the links between the classifications that inform AI datasets and classification processes used to racially sort human beings in the 19th century. And she lays bare the technology's epistemic embedment in the discourses of slavery and colonization. There is a reason that artificial technologies reproduce global asymmetries, particularly those related to race, gender, immigration, or refugee status. Here, I want to introduce the concept of a Wendigo world. Now, Indigenous thinkers around North America have been writing about this notion of the Wendigo, right? Like comes from an Anishinaabe idea of the, well, I'll just be very reductive right now, the Hungry Ghost, right? So scholars, including Jack Forbes, have written persuasively about how we are in a Wendigo moment, in a Wendigo world right now, where essentially humans no longer have relations of meaningful reciprocity. Right? And this is why we are in a condition of perpetual hunger. We are in a condition of soul hunger, which perpetuates the greed in the world, which perpetuates the imbalance in the world. Indigenous scholars Winona LaDuke and Deborah Cowan remind us most of the infrastructure in the world that we inhabit right now happens to be Wendigo infrastructure. So the hungry ghosts of colonialism and capitalism, those other things, they're not at all in the background when we offer ourselves up to the promise of artificial technology. Though there have been calls for ethical frameworks for AI, these can only go so far given the AI industry's proclivity for technical fixes, right? Like technology will fix technology. Or given the proclivity for ethics washing, which is again such a part of like the corporate move. From a decolonial perspective and within an Indigenous worldview, it is not just the stated aims of technology that we need to pay attention to, but whether it attends to good relations. As per Lieu analysis and also analysis offered by Michelle Murphy, in the aftermath of environmental damage, good relations include words, protocols, and methods that honor the inseparability of bodies and land on the one hand. And on the other hand, they also honor the chemical relations of colonialism that entangle life forms. We can't leave behind history. Well, we can't leave behind the present either. Right? So LaDuke and Cowan talk about alimentary infrastructure that is life-giving in design, in finance, and in effects. Only if technology can attend to good, meaningful relations as an integral part of its making can it feed into the other temporalities that link our pasts and that link our futures with the now. So the notion of beneficial relations, it's not something that can be, it needs to be, by definition, it needs to be highly contextual and highly specific, right? And it needs to be embodied. It is not abstract. It is not something that can be scaled up for profit, right? It's not something that responds to grandiosity. So this is kind of like the analytical, that's kind of like the analysis, right? But I don't want us to stop with the analysis. I want us to go further. I want us to also dream up another possibility together, because, we can do that. We're here, right? Like, and that's decolonial work. There is an analytical component, and then there is a visionary component. There is a dreaming component, right? So it is when we are in a participatory conversation with the earth that we can specifically listen to the songs arising from the earth about gift and purpose and meaning and need and reciprocity, right? That dance. And this is the conversation that provides us with a methodology of nuanced connection and humility. And we humans have an innate capacity for relationship with and within a multi-species world. When we move out of a dualistic framework, we can attune to the beneficial relations between people and land and other beings, right? So the question I have for us here that we can all tend to together, what would it take for us to awaken and reawaken moment after moment this capacity, right? How might we reawaken those places within us that want to supersede the responsibility of this relationship to algorithmic processes that have been pre-programmed, right? And so we'll move into a short practice, and I want us to, the practices allow us to question the inevitability of anything, right? Like, post-human moment is not here. We get to question that, we get to reframe that, we get to do something else here, right? And the practice that I'm offering here is something very small. When we're thinking from within an Indigenous decolonizing framework, an alive psyche, right? Like, there are innumerable practices that can be that can emerge, that can arise, right? Like, practices that may involve song, movement, poetry, prophecy, prayer, play, dreaming, right? Like, there's imagination, there's a lot here. So, I want you all to know that life is continually becoming, right? So with that, if you would like to enter into a short practice with me, I want you to just settle in a little better wherever you are. Just make yourself a little comfortable. Make sure your feet are on the ground. And take a breath. And I want you to imagine that you're in a place where time flows differently. Because time flows differently, you find you can come face to face with the 7 generations that came before you, riding on whose back you're here in this moment. Just feel them there with you. And then feel the 7 generations who are yet to come also there. You don't have to know who they are, you just have to sense them. And there's a soft sound that emerges into your consciousness. It's the sound of water So you follow that sound because it's calling to you. It's summoning you somewhere. And when you follow the sound, you find that it's a river calling you. So just arrive next to the river. Just feel the wind, the temperature, sunlight. Step a little closer to the river. Notice, what is the color of the riverbed? What's the size and shape, the stones and the pebbles and the rocks on the riverbed? And maybe one of these rocks calls you. So you bend and you pick up this rock and you're holding it in your hands. Feel its weight. And notice that the stone wants to communicate with you. The voice of someone wants to bring something to you, kind of knowing this could be a mythic figure, and this could be an ancestor. This could be a being of the earth from the mineral realm or the plant realm or the animal realm. Stones are the recorders of the memory of the earth, memory of the planet. Now in this moment, this stone has something for you. Could be a message or a story about something that's either not working in the whole or the web of life, or something that wants to work differently, something that wants to work through you. Or maybe it has a message about something that's in your capacity now, about your power to affect a difference. So, what is the insight? What is the knowledge? What is the wisdom for you in this moment? And when you have that, ask a question. Question is, how may I honor and thank you for bringing me this right now? and listen to the answer.
Yeah.
And when your listening is complete, can come back through your breath back into this time where your body is here in this room. And if you'd like to, you can take a couple of minutes just to note down what you heard. Curious if anybody would like to share what they heard, what they received. And do we have like a handheld mic?
Oh. Yeah, as I went through that process, what came through was let your heart break open. And as I asked the question that you had us ask, I received, sing your heart out, Sam. Sing your heart out, Sam. And I'm reminded of how much I used to sing when I was a kid. And as my voice shifted through puberty and going through all the changes in myself, I stopped singing. And it was just a really touching and beautiful reminder. Thank you.
I hope you bring more song into the world now. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I just really, there was just a visceral connection to red and the sound of a rushing river and blood flow and, the earth as a living, breathing entity and equating that with my own body.
Thank you. In the listening, I asked and listened to the question of how do we be keepers of the wisdom? How does knowledge plus love equal wisdom? How does that come forward? And how do we discover the divine within, throughout? Yeah. And what does that look like in the paradigm that you were sharing about? The thoughts that came through were nature love versus capitalism, and the monarchy, the mother, the nurturing aspect, and racism to equality, and colonialism to cradle thinking of freedom.
Yes, mine was a like a medium dark blue stone that asked to be picked up, and when I asked what it could tell me or what it had for me, it asked to be placed in my mouth, and it was something that wasn't in words. It needed to be given over time or experienced, like bodily. And when I asked it what I could offer it, sorry, I might cry, in return, it said to share my heart, like to share the blood, like as the source. Like, I don't know, it just asked to share my heart, the blood in my heart with me. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was very beautiful.
I love that blood's coming up, right? Like, and again, blood is so, blood is life. Like, again, we have this like capacity to know this, right? Like without somewhere our organismic self knows that we have this relationship to blood. So, and again, for many women, they do generate blood every month. So, that makes a beautiful offering back to the earth also. Again, like one of those old ways. I'm just saying this because blood's coming up. Yeah. And I also want us to just like pay attention. This is like we're tending to each other right now. We're like feeding our like image wells and soul wells and imaginal wells and the wells of courage, right? Like this task is collective tending, right? If we were sitting in a different formation, that would be truer, right? Like if we were sitting in a circle. But, we get to still kind of like hold ourselves in that way, maybe. And I also want to like, if somebody wants to continue to share this, that's fine, but we only have a few more minutes, like maybe 5 more minutes. So if there are other questions or other comments that are arising, I just want to open the space for that too. Otherwise, we'll close in a few minutes. Yeah. Yeah, Disha.
Yes, I just have a question. You said you were bracketing what can be offered. So I'm just wondering if you can share anything about that as offerings.
Yeah.
Anyone can.
Yeah, and I think, this idea that I shared from Max Liboiron and, the idea about, let me just find that, the words, protocols, and methods that honor the inseparability of bodies and land, right? So, of course, like if some of you are on a traditional earth-based path or on a non-traditional earth-based path, right? Like you have some sense of the protocols and methods already, right? Like different traditions speak to that in different ways. But if you're not within a particular tradition, I think the thing to do would be to actually like remember that you have the capacity to listen to the earth, right? And the traditional offerings may, most of the time, they do, they are kind of organic in nature in the sense that they, things that don't pollute nature further, right? Like they could be food offerings or fluid offerings. They could be offerings of song, right? Or story or breath or blood, like there's many different ways. A lot of the times, I think I mentioned Martin Prechtel, right? Like St. Martin Prechtel talks about hand-making tools because and if you believe in that cosmological framework, he says the other worlds don't have hands, the spirit worlds don't have hands. So anything you make with your hands and offer, that can be a good offering, right? But I want you to just like, as a poet, I think of my poems as an offering, but again, I have to like move into that reverential framework. Like this is an offering, right? The writing that you did, right? So there's a lot here, right? Like it's that space where you get to establish your unique relationship with the living processes. But I think the thing that I'm asking us is to step into that space again. And again, Prechtel, he in that interview with Jensen, he just gives an example of a knife, a plain and simple knife, right? Like for a lot of us, it's like the most basic tool, right? And he talks about how for an indigenous mind in the Mayan Zutujul village, right? Like it requires a lot of like giving back, because you have to thank the spirit of the fire, right? Like, so there's a lot, like just everything that makes it possible to create the knife makes the knife an expensive technology, right? So he says, if this is expensive, this is why someone who's attuned to that sense of balance will not even choose to work with destructive technologies, because, or like, if you're, the bigger technologies may, require a lot of that gifting back, right? But we are not in that context. We are in a different context. And actually, we may all be in the room here together, but each of us are in a different context. We might be living in the same house together, but we're still contextually different. So which is where I think like this thing comes back, right? Like we don't get to do what someone else has done. Maybe there are ancestral protocols we can turn to. So I don't know your, if you know of any ancestral protocols or things like that. But I want us to really, tap into what's this place of reciprocity, right? Rather than thinking of like, this is how it needs to be done, because we're not at that moment anymore. Like that's not what is being asked of us by Indigenous epistemologies right now. Does that help?
As I was thinking of just across cultures and across like what sorts of offerings there have been or there were. So yes, but thank you so much.
Can we take, how much time do we, last one? Is that okay? Okay.
Another power is the water. So the blood and the red and the water and the clarity. And what came to me, another thing that I didn't say, was just that water brings up both the unconscious and the consciousness, especially the ocean, right? So a river and ocean. And that those essences of communion of the red, as you were talking about, and sharing, and the song of the water and the song of the blood together, body and water, what we're made of and what the earth is made of, and that communion of one, was really brought forward in that inquiry to be stewards of that and see that in all creation and one another.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. And this idea of stewarding, it's, it's very specific. And I think, I remember this conversation I had with some friends a long time ago. Our modern minds shy away from the word obligation a little bit. The minute we come across the word obligation, we find ourselves shrinking, right? There's something to this, like what is being asked of us. And the minute we, allow ourselves to both give and receive, right? And give specifically and receive specifically, rather than just this, universalist idea of like, anything goes, because that's not what I'm saying here also. It's not anything goes, right? Like this is where we have to pay attention to the specificity of relationship. What about this river, the river that you will by, right? Not just any river. Anyway, I know that I'm out of time, and I know that next up is Dr. Lance Smith. We'll probably take a few minutes break, and I hope you'll stay for his talk too. But thank you all for coming, and I'll be around in case you have more questions or comments.